Hey guys, this is Chad from CSRC. Today we're going to be assembling one of the CSRC 124 scale top fuel kits. So let's get started. First thing we're going to need to do is get our servo mount and our 3.7 gram servo. And we're going to orient him so the output shaft goes into the mount like such. Now to screw him in place, we're going to get two of our listed 172 by 3/16 button heads, and we will screw that guy into place. Now we're going to go ahead and get our rear main chassis portion, and what we're going to do is we need to feed our servo wire in through the back of the cockpit like this and out the access on the front side here, and then we'll put our servo in there kind of sideways in the chassis until it gets in there, and then it will just fold down into place. Now looking at this guy from the bottom, you'll see there is a pair of slots there, and we're going to need two of our 2mm by 6mm button head screws to bolt this guy down. Now we're not going to tighten him down, we're just going to snug it down into place for now. And we are going to put it at the forwardmost position for right now. We'll back him off a couple of turns. That way that slips back and forth a little bit and gives us some adjustment for our push rod for our steering. Now the next thing that we're going to get is our battery cover and our engine. We're going to get two more of our 2mm by 6mm button heads, and we'll go ahead and flip our battery door over and get a screw started there. And there we go. Now we can set our engine and battery door off to the side. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to install our steering push rod into our front chassis portion. So we'll set our rear chassis off to the side and we'll grab our front chassis portion. Now previous to this, I did take my servo push rod here and I did clean out the inside of that guide tube really good to make sure there was no garbage in there. First thing we're going to do is we're going to grab our steering bell crank. Now, we'll take our push rod and we'll drop back about a ½ inch from the end of the rod, because all we want to do is we want to have our Z-bend down like this, and we just want to put a slight kink in it. Just enough where it's off to the side, just a little bit, like such. Now, we're going to take our push rod and we're going to install it in the front of the tube. Now you'll have to use your thumb to guide it in there. And there we go. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to take the Z-bend portion of that push rod and we're going to take our steering bell crank and we're going to put it on there. So once it's on, we're going to orient it so that guy just goes ahead and kind of turns into place in the center of the chassis where the bell crank goes. We need our 172 by 3/8 cap screw. Alright. And we're going to tighten him up until that bell crank snugs against the top. There we go. She's snugged down there. Now at that point, I'll take the servo push rod and move that bell crank back and forth manually just to work it in a little bit. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and go back and take about a ½ a turn off that bolt. And that bell crank moves nice and free now, the way that we need it to. Awesome deal. Awesome deal. All right, now that we've got that guy in place, what we're going to do is we're going to take our two chassis halves and temporarily we're going to slip them together. and we're going to see how much longer the push rod is than needed. And for right now, we're going to come back here and we're going to trim him back right in between these two pillars on the chassis, and we're going to trim off the extra just to get it out of our way for right now. And now we can go ahead and take those back apart for the time being. The next thing we're going to need is we're going to have to get our steering knuckles. So here's our left and right steering knuckles. And we're going to need to get two 2mm by 12mm button head screws. And we'll start with the left knuckle. And of course, I have already drilled and tapped all this stuff out in advance, so I'm not having to do it on camera, and this doesn't take forever. And we'll snug them down and then back them off whole turn. Now we're ready for our steering drag link, and that's what this guy looks like. And the way he's going to go into the car is in this orientation with the slot back. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our steering push rod and we'll pull that so our bell crank is facing like such, so we can put that in there and slip this slot over the stud on that drag link. There you go. See, that's how that works, is that slot lets that stud move around. And there you go. Now we are ready to bolt the drag link to our steering knuckles, which uses some very small 1.5mm self-tapping hardware that I got in a kit off of Amazon. You can find in the description. There we go. I'll just put him through there. There we go. We got that side hooked up where that steering knuckle's all in place and moving. Now we just got to put the screw in the other side here. And there we go. Our steering assembly works nice. It's nice and free moving, but it's not sloppy. Now that we've got our steering rack assembly all together, we can go ahead and take our front chassis portion and put it off to the side again. The next thing that we're going to need is going to be our rear motor pod. Now at this point, we're going to need the motor that we've chosen because we're going to put that guy in place. We got our motor plate in place now, and our motor moves in its pod the way it should. Right now, we're going to need to get our motor screws, get those in our motor. Now that we've got that in there, the next thing that we're going to need is going to be our flex plate. And this is what our flex plate looks like. It's going to go in the motor pod in this configuration. We got our flex plate in place now. Now we can take our motor pod and set it off to the side for a second. And we will come back to our rear main chassis portion. Now we need to take our center shock, and we're going to take him and we're going to bolt him into the chassis, coming at it from the inside like such. And there we are. Now we can take our motor pod, and since I installed all my electronics first, the first thing I'm going to do is fish all my electronics up through the wiring hatch here. like such. Okay, once I've done that, I will flip things over, and at that point, everything should just key into place. And what you should be looking at from the bottom should look like this. So as you look at it, the motor pod's going to look like it offsets a little bit. Now that we've got that bolted in there, now we just got to bolt our center shock in place on our motor pod. And there's our rear end, all in place. Awesome. As you can see, I've got that speed control in there, so it's sitting on top of the servo mount, and I have fished the wiring out the access here in the front. That way our receiver access is right over here, and we'll be able to get to everything. Now that we've got that done, we can mate our two chassis halves. In order to do that, we go ahead and slide things together like we did earlier when we were test fitting that servo linkage. And we're going to need 3 of our 2x6 button head screws. And we'll start off on the bottom by joining the 2 halves there. And then to put the 3rd screw in, we come at it from the other side here. There. Now we'll flip it back over and we'll go ahead and snug those screws down the rest of the way. There we go. All right. There we go. Now we've got our chassis halves mated, and it's starting to look like a car. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to take our rear wing, and we're going to need 2 more of these 2x6mm button head screws. And we'll go ahead and get one started in the wing to hold it in place. Alright. And then our holes in the top of the chassis are right there. And there we go. We're really starting to look like a drag car now. Now that we've married our 2 halves, next thing we need to do is get our length set on our servo wire. But the first thing we need to do is trim out that servo and make sure it's centered. While we're here, we might as well make sure the motor runs. Alright, got forward brake, reverse. We're good there, and servo works, and we are centered. So at that point, we'll go ahead and shut everything off. And at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to take the car and we're going to see the center of the servo hole. Now, the way I've been doing this is, at this point, I will make sure that our servo adjustment on the bottom is moved forward all the way. It is. With that slid forward, we'll come here and go just past, so we can move our servo back into place where we need it, and we'll make a right angle bend there. Now the next part is the rough part, and it takes having a pair of needle nose pliers with a small thin tip on them, and we'll grab it right there where we just bent that guy. We'll take our first pair of pliers and pull them up to the bend, and boom, we'll get that bend going just like that. Now after we've established the bend and it's there, it's not so bad. We can come in there, grab hold of it, and force the bend over the rest of the way. Alright, now we've got a nice homemade Z-bend there, and it will get the job done. Alright, at that point, grab our cutters, and we don't need that much of that end off there. We just need a couple millimeters past that Z-bend. So we will cut that extra rod right off there. Well, the next thing that we're going to need is, in the pack that the servo came with, it had a whole selection of servo horns. What we need is the smallest servo horn out of the bunch that came with it, a little single hold arm. And that's what we need. Now remember, we trimmed everything out. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that guy and we'll put him over our Z-bend. And what we're going to want to do is make sure we get that servo horn straight up and down. There we go. Now that that's in place, we'll get our screw that holds that horn in place and we'll tighten it down. Now that everything's in place, what we can do is we can use moving our servo around a little bit to bring our steering knuckles into alignment. Loosen both of those screws up so that slides. And what we'll do is we'll just slide it around until our steering knuckles look like we're going straight, because we know our servo's trimmed out. And so, yeah, there we go. Right there. Right there will be perfect and get us close enough where we can bring it back in with our steering trim. So we're basically setting the mechanical trim, sliding our servo back and forth. We're ready to get our radio system installed. I have been using the FlySky FSGT2 cheap radios. So what this car is actually designed to use that radio, and you take the receiver out of the case, and what it's designed to do is to slip right down in there like such behind the servo linkage and everything, and there's a slot in the front chassis portion where the circuit board just slides in there and everything keys into place. So that's what you're left with, so you can plug things in on the opposite side. And once again, I've just been hot gluing that guy into place. So I'll be right back. I'm going to hot glue our electronics down. All right, guys, got the electronics all mounted in here. Let's go ahead and take a look at things, and we'll take a good look at how I did it. The receiver is mounted in here behind things like I was talking about earlier. As you can see, there's more than enough room for it. It's not touching the push rod in any way, but it's hot glued in from the face, and then a bead of hot glue at the bottom to hold things in place. On the flip side, that's kind of our wiring nest right there. Plug things in and nest all the extra wire up there. We are ready to put our battery in place and turn things on, make sure things work and are trimmed correctly. So I've been running these Sheeta LiPo 450 milliamp hour. They work great in the battery compartment, and plenty of punch for heads up racing for sure. So let's put this guy in here, and in order to put them in, the way I've been putting them in is I've been putting them in wiring side down like such, so the wiring gets tucked in like such, and tuck it down in the sides like that, because then you take our battery door and put it on like that and just kind of squeeze lightly, and it just pops down into place. There, everything's in. So let's give it a test. There are speed controls initializing, and we've got steering. How about that? All right, at this point, we're ready to start building our rear axle. So we'll go ahead and shut all this back down. Now the next thing we're going to need is our 1/8" rear axle. Now this is just an 1/8" drill blank cut to size, and the size is 59 millimeters. So it needs to be between 59 and 60. It's got a flat spot on the left-hand side that is 11.5. The flat spot on the drive side with the spur gear is 18. The left-hand side has got a flat spot that's 11.5. The spur gear side, the flat spot is 18. In order to build it, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get our 44 tooth spur gear, and we're going to put that on the 18 side, and we're going to get him on the flat spot. And I've got a set screw in there, and I'll tighten that set screw down on that flat spot like such. All right, good deal. Good deal. All right. Now, the next thing that we're going to need is we're going to need our 1/8 inch by 1/4 inch by 1/8 inch flanged bearings. And we're going to take those and we're going to put those in our rear pod. And those just push into place like such and like such. All right. Got those guys in place in our rear pod. Now, before we go putting any tires or anything on, we'll slide our rear axle into place. And it should just slip right through those bearings. And there we go. Before we've got our tires on, now is a wonderful time to set our gear mesh. So we'll go ahead and do that, and we'll get our gear mesh set up here. There we go. We've got our gear mesh set. Now, the next thing we're going to need that we've got our gear mesh set is there is a left side spacer. This is just a 2mm thick spacer that goes over the shaft on the left-hand side. There we go. There we go. Now our rear end is ready for our wheels and tires. I've got my tires all glued onto my wheels here and all set to go. But for reference, the tires we're going to be using for these wheels are a Mini Z Buggy Type Z rear tire, part number BL 1855, P&N Racing rear tire. I've also got set screws pre-installed on my wheels, and they are just 172 by 3/16 button head screws. So at this point, we're just going to go ahead and line up where our screw is, our set screw is on the flat spot on the axle shaft, and snug him down. There we go. All right, that wheel's on. Now we'll just flip him over and do the same thing on the other side. Find your flat spot and line up your set screw in your wheel with the flat spot and press him into place. Once he's in place, snug him down, and there we go. All right, we've got our rear end all set to go. Next thing, we just need to install the front wheels. All right, we've got our front wheels. We've already got our bearings installed. The tire itself is just a 17mm ID by 5 O-ring. I've been getting them on Amazon in packs of 25 or 10 or whatever I've been needing them in. But it's just a generic O-ring for the front end. 17mm ID by 5 is the measurement once again. So those guys, we'll grab our front axle shafts, put them through the wheel. I've been putting one of these spacers that printed out with the other spacers on the back side. That way there's a washer between the wheel and the steering knuckle. And we'll just take that guy and bolt him right into the steering knuckle here. And we'll just snug him down till the wheel doesn't turn. There we go, and back him off till it does spin freely. There we go. All right. Now, let's do the same thing on the other side here. There we go. All right, now we have a runner that's ready for its body. Set it aside, and now we'll take a look at our body, which this is a new body that requires at least 275 millimeters of Z height to run because it runs in a standing position. And as you can see, it prints out in spiral vase mode the way that I've been doing my pan cars and a lot of other things here lately. So it needs to be trimmed out. And also, these side dams print separately. So those need to be glued on after the fact. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to trim this guy out, and I'll see you guys in a minute. Alright guys, as you can see, we got that trimmed away, and we got our side dams glued on. And when this guy gets put on the car, it goes on like this, and there we go, right like that. And after we get it in place, we just need 2 more of our 2mm by 6mm button head screws to hold our body in place. One up front here, and one back by the cockpit. And there we go. That guy's all done. And that looks quite beautiful, I'd say. Thanks for joining me, guys, and I hope this helps with any questions you had about the assembly process of this guy. You guys have a great one.